He stood alone in the dry grit, a battered German shepherd with a leg bent wrong and trembling as though each murmur in the crowd pressed down on his spine. No one stepped forward. Not one hand lifted. They whispered words like damaged, worthless, too far gone. The auctioneer, already moving to strike the gavel, paused, because from the far back, a hand rose. No announcement, no speech. Just a quiet motion, deliberate and calm, that would become the match to light something far bigger. What was it about this dog that stirred something in a man who didn't want to be seen? And what was buried in that man's past that made him reach for pain instead of retreat from it? This is more than a rescue story. It's about grit, grace, and the strange ways broken lives find each other. But before we begin, take a second to tap the like button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to know. The Billings livestock yard wasn't known for miracles. You came for cattle, maybe a tractor, and left with dust in your lungs and sweat on your collar. Between the clang of gates and the calls of bidders, you wouldn't expect stillness, until that day, when the usual chaos buckled under something quieter. Not a shout, not a fight, but a dog. He limped in from a side gate like a ghost chasing daylight. Male, German shepherd. His coat caked with grime, scars like faded maps along his ribs, a hind leg trailing as though it had given up months back. Around his neck, the ghost of a chain, rubbed into memory. No bark, no whine, just a quiver in his stance, a quiet resilience. The auctioneer, always a thunder of charisma, faltered. His pitch stumbled. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Lost course. Bet he bit someone. Not worth feed. Not even sympathy made an appearance. The dog wasn't seen. Not really. Just a liability with fur. The auctioneer raised the gavel to move on, until a hand rose. Silent. Steady. Not a wave. Not a plea. Just an arm lifted from a sea of apathy. Heads turned. Who? He wore a beat-up leather jacket, sleeves torn by time, boots crusted with Montana soil. His silver-threaded hair curled around ears weathered by wind, and a scar ran along his jaw like punctuation on a past no one dared to ask about. He said nothing. He just nodded. Once. The gavel fell. Sold. Confusion murmured across the barn. Who buys a dog like that? Was it charity? Guilt? Something else entirely? The man moved down the aisle. No hurry. No fee. The dog lifted his head. Barely. Their eyes met. Not in a movie moment. Not dramatic. But something flickered. An ember catching breath. The man didn't grab. He knelt. One hand out. Palm resting on the dog's shoulder like a vow not yet spoken. Then the impossible happened. The dog leaned in. Not much. Just enough. A silent surrender. Someone caught it on their phone. No dialogue. Just two battered silhouettes pressing into each other while the rest of the world kept shouting about bulls and bids. The video spread fast. But it didn't tell the story. Not the real one. That story began on the road home. The drive stretched through rusted trees clinging to late autumn's last colors. The truck creaked and complained. Elijah Kane kept both hands on the wheel, his eyes flicking to the mirror. Back to the dog curled silent in the bed. Alert. Not quite resting. Every bump triggered a flinch, as if the ground could betray him too. But this was in the auction yard, and Elijah wasn't the kind of man to flinch from ghosts. He lived at the edge of Laurel, Montana, where forests swallowed fences and silence didn't ask for company. His cabin leaned like it had made peace with gravity. Inside, an old stove, carefully stacked firewood, and a bed that hadn't been shared in a decade. He hadn't brought anything, or anyone, home in years. Until now. He carried the dog in his arms like he was holding smoke. Rook didn't fight. Just trembled, too tired to resist. Elijah laid him down on flannel near the hearth. Added towels. Lit the fire. Still, the dog didn't close his eyes. That night, Elijah made stew. The dog didn't eat. He watched. Every move. Every flick of the man's wrist like it could signal danger. Not hunger. Memory. Elijah didn't order. Didn't force. He just sat across the room and whispered, like talking to an old friend. Rook. A flicker in the air. That's your name now. No movement. No rejection. But the air shifted. like the night changed its mind about being cold. 4 hours. Elijah didn't leave that floor. He watched flames draw shapes on the walls while the dog stayed still, eyes wide, body rigid. Only when the fire cracked just right did Rook twitch. Elijah didn't react, just pulled a blanket closer, let his hand rest near, not on, Rook's bedding. It took minutes, but eventually, the dog moved. Barely, until one paw brushed against Elijah's fingers. Nothing grand, just contact. The beginning of something they both didn't have a name for. By morning, frost kissed the windows. The forest outside still slept. Inside, Elijah woke not to barking, but to warmth. The dog had moved closer in the night. Not trust, but closeness. And closeness matters. Healing isn't always loud. It's claws scratching hardwood. A man and a dog learning how to share breath. That day passed slow. Rook eyed everything. Jumped at metal. Flinched at boots. Ate only when Elijah sat on the floor beside him. Bit by bit, the routine settled, but the limp didn't fade. Twice, when Elijah brushed too close to the hind leg, Rook snapped. Not to attack, to warn. Pew fey. Elijah didn't scold. He backed off. Waited. 10 minutes of silence before Rook inched forward. Pressed his nose against Elijah's hand. Not trust, just fatigue from fey. Later, under the fur, Elijah felt old wounds. Burns, placed where no paw could reach. Precise. Cruel. Done by someone who knew how to hurt. His breath caught. His jaw clenched. He didn't say a word. Just opened a leather journal, scribbled like a man trying to bleed out guilt. Names. Places. Things left unsaid. That night, the dog whimpered in dreams. You're not there anymore, Elijah whispered. And Rook settled. In the days that followed, patterns emerged. Chains, metal bowls, even uniforms sent Rook into defense. These weren't random triggers. They were coded traumas. But the strangest thing, the way he looked at Elijah. Not like a stranger. Like he remembered him. Like this wasn't the first time their lives had brushed. Then came the knock. 3 slow raps just after midnight. Deputy Lance Dwyer at the door. Familiar face. Not a friend. There was a break-in, he said. Old Wilcox Ranch. You used to work there. The name froze the air. Rook stepped between them, growling low. Not at the deputy. At the name. Later that night, Elijah opened a crate he'd buried in the shed. Army patches. Photos. Old contracts, including one signed at Wilcox. Rook didn't blink. He just watched. Like he'd known all along. The next morning, they returned to the ranch. Not the house. The backfield. Rook stopped near overgrown brush. Poured at the earth. Elijah knelt. Dug. Found a metal box. Inside, photos. Dogs. Hurt. Crates. Notes. Names. His name. Next to transport. No questions. Elijah trembled. Looked at the last photo. Rook. Younger. Numbered tag. Not coincidence. Fate. The box went in a canvas bag. They drove to the sheriff's office. Deputy Dwyer didn't ask. He knew. This is everything, Elijah said. By nightfall, Everett Raw's name hit the wire. Warrants. Scans. Case files resurrected. And Elijah. He wasn't running anymore. He was hunting. For justice. For Rook. For every chained dog still waiting for someone to look. Not away. But closer. They didn't go back to the cabin. They drove east. To land Elijah had been preparing. For dogs like Rook. A sanctuary. No fences. No chains. Only space to heal. Rook stepped out of the truck. Tail wagged once. Not the end. A new start. Because some stories aren't about saving. They're about returning. To the truth. To each other. And to the kind of love that stitches the past into purpose. The snow whispered across the highway as they left Bozeman behind. Soft flakes dancing like ghosts trying to keep up. The world looked clean, but Elijah knew better. Truth didn't come easy. It came clawing, like Rook in his sleep, legs twitching with dreams he hadn't outlived. The vet's words haunted him. These scars weren't accidents. Shot prods, burn rings, trained to endure torment, not just survive it. Elijah gripped the wheel tighter, the leather groaning beneath his hands. In the passenger seat, Rook stayed still but alert, ears perked, eyes flicking toward every passing shadow. They weren't just chasing answers anymore. They were chasing a man. Everett Raw. A name Elijah had hoped never to speak again. A name that now thundered in his skull with every mile. Elijah had worked for him once, back when money was low, when morality bent underweight. He hadn't asked questions. He hadn't opened doors he was told to ignore. But he'd heard things. Crates that whined in the dark. Dogs that disappeared. And always, that feeling in his gut that something was deeply, horrifically wrong. Now that feeling had a face. And a trail. Rook didn't growl when Elijah spoke the name aloud. He didn't need to. His whole body shifted, alert and bracing, like he'd been waiting for this road. They pulled into Livingston under gray skies, the air sharp and cold. A plot of land waited there, fenced, but only to keep out predators. No chains, no kennels, just open space, rough soil, and potential. Elijah didn't say much as they stepped out. He just opened the truck door and let Rook wander. The dog limped across the grass, nose low, tail neutral, not quite at peace, but no longer looking for escape. This was where it would begin. A home not just for him, but for others like him. He'd already started the paperwork, non-profit status, permits, donations from the few old contacts who still picked up his calls. Some knew, some guessed, some didn't ask, only gave. The place didn't have a name yet. Elijah figured Rook would pick it when the time was right. Inside the half-built shelter, Elijah laid out the box from the ranch, files, photos, contracts, proof. He opened a drawer, pulled out a phone he hadn't used in years, and dialed the number at the bottom of one of those forms. It rang twice before a clipped voice answered. "You shouldn't be calling this number." Elijah didn't flinch. "I've got something you buried, and I'm not the only one digging." Silence. Then, "Where?" "Livingston. Come clean, or the press will." He hung up. The line had been drawn. That night, Elijah sat on the porch, gun across his lap. Rook by his side, his body relaxed for the first time in weeks. Together they stayed into the dark. Two sentinels holding space between what was and what needed to be. But they weren't the only ones watching. Deep in the timberline, another figure leaned against a tree, smoke curling from a cigarette that burned like a fuse. He watched the house, saw the dog, and didn't smile. Everett Raw hadn't disappeared. He'd simply waited for the wrong person to remember. Now that person was armed, with truth and a dog who remembered every sound behind those closed doors. The war hadn't started yet, but it would. And this time, silence wouldn't protect the guilty. The frost held tight to the ground that morning, clinging like it knew what was coming. Elijah rose before the sun, Rook already standing by the door as if he'd read the day in the wind. No barking, no pacing, just stillness, the kind that comes when instinct has already made a decision. They weren't staying. Not until this was finished. Rook hopped into the truck bed, settled in without command. Elijah tossed in the gear bag, rope, bolt cutters, field maps, and the same revolver he hadn't touched since his last deployment. Everything rattled like old bones. The engine groaned to life, and they pulled away from the sanctuary in progress without looking back. In town, Deputy Dwyer was waiting outside the station, thermos in hand, steam rising like smoke signals. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," Elijah said, "but I'm going anyway." Dwyer handed him a file. Thin, but dense. Inside, land purchases under shell companies, hunting cabin permits, radio tower leases that didn't match addresses. All breadcrumbs. All pointing to one stretch of forest in eastern Gallatin County. "Is there," Dwyer said. "Off-grid. Keeps people away with signs and threats." "He still have dogs?" Dwyer hesitated. "Maybe. But whatever he's hiding, it's not just cages anymore." Elijah took the file, nodded, and climbed back in the truck. No words needed. The dog didn't bark, but his ears twitched at the name. Raw. They drove for hours through winding mountain passes, pine shadows stretching like long fingers across the road. Every mile peeled back a layer Elijah had tried to bury. Every glance from Rook reminded him why they were doing this. At the edge of the property, the sign started. Private land. Trespassers shot. Beware of dogs. No help beyond this point. Irony wasn't lost on either of them. Elijah cut the engine a mile out. They walked the rest. Rook's limp light but present. He sniffed everything. Rocks, trees, even the air itself. Like it might remember him too. Then the barking started. Far off. High-pitched. Frantic. Rook froze. His whole body went rigid. Not from fear, but recognition. He took a step forward. Then another. Elijah followed. They crested the hill and saw it. A compound. Fenced in razor wire. Metal sheds. Kennels lining the far wall like prison cells. Dogs inside. Dozens. Pacing. Howling. Waiting. At the center, a low log cabin. The porch light burst. And standing beneath it, arms crossed, was Everett Raw. He hadn't changed much. Grayer maybe. Slower. But still carved from the same stone. Eyes cold. Mouth flat. Well, damn, he muttered. Didn't expect you to come knocking, Kane. Elijah didn't speak. He just walked. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Rook matched him, step for step. Raw chuckled. Still carrying strays. I see. He remembered this place. Rook growled. Low, raw, ancient. A sound pulled from a wound no scar could hide. I remember enough, Elijah said. And I've got something to return. He pulled the canvas bag from his shoulder and threw it at Raw's feet. The box inside clanged. Files. Photos. A list of names. Raw looked down. Then up. Unimpressed. You think I'm scared of paper? No, Elijah said. You're scared of what happens when people start listening. For a moment, silence. Then a sharp whistle from Raw. From the shadows, a dog lunged. Big. Black. Scarred like a fighter. Rook didn't move. Not an inch. He just locked eyes with the approaching beast, held his ground, and let out a bark so guttural it shook the air. The other dog stopped, whimpered, backed off. It wasn't dominance. It was memory. Rook had been here, had survived this, and the others knew it. Elijah stepped forward. Call off the cages. Open the sheds. You do it, or I do. Raw smiled, slow and venomous. You're not a cop. No, Elijah said, voice like gravel. I'm what comes after one fails. Behind him, engines approached. Deputy Dwyer's voice rang out. Sharp. Everett Raw. This property is under investigation. Step back and surrender. Raw's face twisted. Not fear, but fury. The kind that only comes when a man realizes his grip is finally slipping. It didn't matter. Within the hour, the compound was swarmed. Kennels opened. Dogs freed. One by one, handlers arrived. Animal control. Vets. Officers. Reporters. And Rook. He didn't bark. He just sat in the middle of the chaos, head high, as if to say I told you we'd come back. That night, back at the cabin, Elijah sat beside the fire again. Rook curled next to him. No nightmares. No trembling. Just sleep. For the first time in a long time. And this time, Elijah whispered the words. We're done running. Spring came slow to Montana that year. The thaw dripped from pine needles like tears too proud to fall fast, and the land softened just enough to hold weight again. Not just of boots and paws, but of new beginnings. The compound was empty now. Raw was gone, taken into custody, his story unspooling across headlines. Illicit dogfighting operation tied to former livestock co-op founder uncovered after viral auction video sparks investigation. But Elijah Kane didn't read the papers. He was too busy building. Out on the stretch of land near Livingston, the old fencing had been pulled up. In its place stood wide pastures, gated only by breeze and trust. The barn had been rebuilt from the frame out, cedar and steel, insulated stalls, soft lights, no locks. He planted wild grass, laid gravel for the drive, and carved a trail into the woods where dogs could run without fear of where the world ended. It had a name now. Second Run. Named for the chance he didn't get the first time. And at its heart was Rook. Not chained. Not silent. But home. He limped less now, though the leg would always be stiff. A reminder, maybe, not of the pain, but of what came after. He had his own bed by the hearth, but rarely used it. He preferred the porch. Watching, guarding, not from danger, from forgetting. Because Second Run wasn't just a sanctuary. It was a memory that barked back. The dogs came slowly at first. One from a flood-stricken farm in Idaho. Another rescued from an abandoned storage unit in Colorado. Then 3 more, all seized from a case in Butte. Eyes dull, ribs sharp, but still breathing. Elijah didn't rush them. Didn't force them to be anything other than alive. Some growled for weeks. Some never barked at all. But Rook knew the language. He walked with them in silence, slept near their crates, shared the warmth of his presence. Not dominance, not pity, just witnessing. And sometimes, that was enough. Alina Merrick visited often. The clinic in Bozeman had partnered with Second Run officially now. Vaccines, surgeries, rehabilitation plans. She and Elijah didn't talk much about the past. Not anymore. But something lived in the spaces between their words. Forgiveness maybe. Or something close enough. On a morning when the sky opened clean and wide, a van pulled up the gravel drive. Inside, a boy stepped out. 8, maybe 9. His foster mother trailed behind. His counselor said being around dogs might help. She offered, eyes heavy with the kind of hope people stop admitting they need. Elijah nodded. Let's just let them meet. Rook approached slowly. No wag, no bark. Just walked up to the boy and sat. Close but not too close. The boy knelt, unsure. Then, Rook leaned in, pressed his head against the boy's shoulder, and waited. The boy cried, quietly, like his chest had been holding back a storm too long. No one said anything. They didn't need to, because Rook wasn't just a dog anymore. He was proof. Proof that scars didn't mean the story was over. Proof that sometimes, someone will come back for you. That night, Elijah wrote the final entry in the old leather journal. The pages were weathered, stained with sweat, dirt, and memory. He didn't write much. Just a date. And one line. We turned pain into place. He closed the book, set it on the shelf beside the front door. Outside, the stars blinked against the black like they'd been waiting all night to be noticed. And on the porch, a man and a dog sat side by side, watching over land that once knew silence, but now echoed with the sounds of healing. Paws in dry grass, a child's laugh, and the deep, quiet breath of a dog who made it home. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Support local rescues. Adopt. Don't shop. And remember, sometimes the most broken souls are the ones who teach us how to heal. Follow for more stories that restore faith, one paw print at a time.